that you've had an introduction to functions, seen the use of some common statistical functions, and learned about some of the more advanced functions that a data analyst might use, in this video, we'll look at the difference between relative, absolute, and mixed references in formulas, as well as how to use them. And we'll learn about formula errors in Excel. It's important to understand the difference between relative and absolute references when creating your formulas. By default, in Excel, cell references are always relative references. The term relative is the key here because it means that when you reference a cell, you are in fact referencing the cell's position in relation to the cell that the formula is in. That is why, when we have been copying formulas from one cell to another so far in this course, using either copy and paste or the fill handle, we haven't needed to modify the cell references because Excel assumes you are using relative references. When the formulas are copied, the cell references are changed to match the relative positions of the cells that are being copied to. So now we know that relative references are the default in Excel, but how do we make it so that the cell references don't change when we copy them? For that, you need to use absolute references. In contrast to relative references, absolute references to cells stay the same when you copy a formula containing such references. Lastly, there may also be some instances where you only want one of the cell reference identifiers to be absolute and the other one to be relative. For example, you might want the row identifier to be absolute, but the column identifier to be relative, or vice versa. These are called mixed references, and an example of this would be $A $1 plus $A3, where $A1 has a relative column and an absolute row, or $A3 has an absolute column and a relative row. In contrast to relative and absolute references, when you copy a formula containing mixed cell references, any relative cell references will change, whereas any absolute cell references will stay the same in the copied formula. First, let's look at an example of using relative references in a formula. For example, if we enter the formula equals A1 plus A3 in cell 4, note the blue and red highlighted cells in A1 and A3. These denote the cells being relatively referenced in the formula. If we copy the formula to the cell directly below using the fill handle, we can see that the result changes. And if we look at the copied formula, you can see that the blue and red cell references have changed relative to their position on the worksheet. The formula has been changed to equals A2 plus A4 in the copied formula. That is, each cell reference has moved one cell down. And if we copy and paste the formula to C7, you can see that the result also changes. And again, we can see that the blue and red cell references in the copied formula have changed. Now, let's look at an example of how to use absolute references in a formula. All you need to do to make a cell reference absolute is put a $sign in front of the column and or row identifiers in the formula. For example, if we enter the formula equals $A $1 plus sign $A $3 in cell E4, note the blue and red highlighted cells in A1 and A3. These denote the cells being absolutely referenced in the formula. When we copy the formula using the fill handle, you can see that the result stays the same this time. And if we look at the copied formula, you can see that the blue and red cell references haven't changed. The formula is still $A $1 plus $A $3 in the copied formula. That is, the cell references haven't changed. Similarly, if we then copy and paste the formula to E7, you can again see that the result stays the same this time. And we can see that the blue and red cell references haven't changed. The formula is still $A $1 plus $A $3 in the copied formula. That is, the cell references haven't changed. Lastly, we'll look at an example of how to use mixed references in a formula. So if we enter the formula equals $1 plus $A3 in cell G4, note the blue and red highlighted cells in A1 and A3. These denote the cells being referenced in the formula. If we copy the formula to the cell below using the fill handle, you can see that the result changes, but it's a different result from the previous examples. And if we look at the copied formula, you can see that the first blue cell reference has stayed the same, but the second red cell reference has changed. If we copy and paste the formula to G7, you can see that the same thing happens. The result changes. And again, we can see that the first blue cell reference has stayed the same in the copied formula, while only the red cell reference has changed. Now we'll have a quick introduction to dealing with formula errors in Excel. Because of the complexity of writing formulas, especially the more complicated ones, there are bound to be occasions when you make a mistake in the syntax or in the data selection, which will lead to a formula error. Errors are typically denoted by displaying, in the cell that is supposed to be displaying the result, one of the error codes in this list. When you see multiple hash symbols in a cell, it's not really an error. It just means the column either isn't wide enough to display the whole word or value, or it contains a negative date or time value. So if we type Control plus semicolon, then space, then Control plus Shift plus semicolon, it enters today's date and the current time. But the cell is too narrow to display it, so what we see is multiple hash symbols. If we adjust the column width, we can now see the cell contents. So as I said, this really shouldn't be considered as an error. However, if we enter the formula seen in cell I7, when we press enter, we see a hash name error. This error was caused by trying to use an X as a multiplication operator, when in fact it should be an asterisk. Note the small green triangle in the top left corner of the cell. Also, note that when you select the cell, an exclamation mark appears, providing you with a hint about what caused the error. In this case, it says the formula contains unrecognized text. When you click the drop-down arrow next to the exclamation mark for an error, you see several options. The first line also gives you a clue on the nature of the error. This one says invalid name error. So it was probably a mistyped cell reference, value, or function name. If you click Help on this error, a help pane opens with specific information related to this error. If you click Show Calculation Steps, a dialog box opens displaying the current syntax with the error underlined, and you can try to evaluate the error. If you are certain the error is incorrect, you can choose Ignore Error. And if you want to edit the formula, click Edit in Formula Bar, and the cursor will be focused in the formula bar so that you can try and correct the formula error. If you click Error Checking Options, the Excel Options dialog box is opened at the section related to error checking rules, and you can modify these options to suit your needs. Each of the errors you make, which generate one of the error codes listed at the start of this video, will have a different reason and a different solution. For more information on each of these errors and typical solutions, visit the link provided. In this video, we learned about referencing data in formulas, specifically differentiating between relative, absolute, and mixed references, and how to use them. And we learned about formula errors in Excel.